certainly the number one thing, which I learned on my first commission, is always work with the contract. Always, always, always. And, you can download some contracts off the internet. I'd be very happy to share mine if anyone wants an idea of how to do it. It's really important. And there's certain wording that you should probably have, like how you settle claims if there is a situation, which I've never had, but, I learned from Calvin Goodman, a great art marketer, now no longer with us, that clause has to be in there. So work with the contract. And I also wrote about this for BoldBrush, Fine Art Views. Don't believe in fairy tales. You can Google that. That article is online. Don't believe in fairy tales, working with a contract. And this also applies if you work with an art model. If you bring an art model into your home studio to paint, you need to have a contract with them. Okay, so that's the first big one. And in that contract should be details of the commission, the deposit, the final payment, your process, what your portrait, the details of your conversation with the client as to what the portrait is going to be, all of it. So everything you can think of, but try and get it to 2 pages. No one wants to do any more than that. It also makes you look very professional when someone cold calls you off the internet, which often happens to me, and I say, well, we will exchange a contract. It's in the interest of both parties. It protects you, it protects me. And I haven't had a single person get funny about that. The second big thing in the process is a non-refundable deposit, right? Now, I used to do 60% and 40% on satisfactory completion. Now I'll get as much of that deposit down as I can. Yeah. So, but case by case basis. But generally, I'd be shooting for a 60% non-refundable deposit. You don't start the portrait or the painting, landscape, whatever, until that deposit has cleared your account. You don't buy any supplies for it, nothing, no work stuff, because you've already invested a lot of time by this point to get to that contract. I mean, I've chased portrait commission leads for 2 years before I've actually got to the contract bit. It's a cat and mouse game sometimes, and you have to be prepared as a portrait artist to do that. They don't just roll in and on the day you sign the contract. It's a little bit of a dance, and I actually enjoy that dance. So I would also say, do your preparatory sketches for you, not for the client. Do not show the artist the prep sketch. I used to do that. I did that when I worked with a portrait agency, which I was working with a lot. They've since shut down, and they liked me to do a prep sketch for the client. I hated it. The client has no idea how that prep sketch is going to be on a 6-week painting. It's just impossible. And you're already being judged to a negative sometimes on that prep sketch. So now I don't do that, but I do the prep sketch for me, for sure. Very important. The other thing I would say is only show the client the portrait when it is finished for you.
Okay.
Don't show the portrait ahead of that time, because it's about protecting your art brain, your art creativity. The moment you show it and they have a slight negative thing to say or not, you're kind of, you're going on a downward spiral a little bit, rather than finishing it to your satisfaction. And I'm sure, Laura, like me, you're type A, I'm very type A, and that portrait is not going to be finished. It's going to be looking pretty good by the time I show it to them, because I'm, a bit like crazy like that. And then, tips for, maybe more starting out is you have to be willing to make changes on your portrait. If you have a problem with that, you should not go into the commissioned arena. When you're working on a portrait commission, you are working with the client on your shoulder. And if you're working with a portrait agency, which I often have done, you're working with the portrait agent on your shoulder and the portrait agency on your shoulder. So you've got 3 people. That is very hard. Yeah, I made that rule pretty early on, that, in the contract, I put a 2-week grace period for changes. Okay. And they should be minor, because by this point, you should have had such good communication with your client, you know, we're doing this, we're doing that. You do a photo shoot. I usually do a live sitting on the photo shoot as well, like an hour and a half, an hour quick life sketch. And I will tell them, look, but they're there in person, so I can explain it a bit better than perhaps sketches in the studio. Look, this is like a doctor taking his notes, and they see the process, so they know that this is quick, right? It's different from the prep sketch where they haven't seen you create it. So in more recent times, you know, I came to the conclusion that, you know, this 2-week window was a little unfair. I would have people, for instance, come back 2 years later and say, I want the hands changed. Yeah, actually, it was 3 years later. And I thought to myself, it was a lovely client in Malibu. It was a client where you wanted that portrait on the wall. It was a double portrait.
Oh, wow.
And I said to myself, yeah, you're going to do that, because I'm not in the business to have paintings on walls that people hate or put in the cellar. I mean, I know it happens to all of us. John Singer Sargent had, you know, if you've read any of his commission stories, believe it or not, he had people who didn't like some of his commissions, the clients, and that's impossible to believe. But it happens to everybody. It's the nature of the beast. You know, the portrait commission world is an ego-based business, talking about that again. So now my take on it as I've got older, and I have done a lot of portrait commissions, is I really want people to be happy. I mean, certainly you're never going to have someone come back to you and say, I want the figure completely changed. That's just not going to happen if you've done your communication ahead of time well. Is it irritating when something like that happens? Yes, but you're working with the person's people business, and the goal is to have a client that is 110% satisfied. And you know, it's good for business, because you do not want people out there, particularly on the world right now, where people can get on Yelp, whatever it is, and you don't want to run the risk of people running into people saying, oh, well, you know, she did a blah, 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 and she was hard to work with. And that's not going to get you more work. It's not good for, you know, and I hate to keep talking about business and selling, but the portrait commission world is selling. So